Senior U.S. officials are now telling media outlets they know where this weekend's attack on two key Saudi Arabian oil facilities originated: Iran. The U.S. is saying that at least a dozen missiles and more than 20 drones were involved. And today, a senior U.S. official told CBS News that there's a, quote, very compelling forensic case that Iran was responsible. In fact, we're learning now that the Trump administration is weighing options on how to respond to Iran, with military leaders providing the president with a menu of possible actions on Monday. This comes after the Houthi rebels of Yemen, who have been engaged in a resistance to a Saudi-led war on Yemen for 4 years now, actually claimed responsibility for this attack, saying it was retribution for Saudi Arabia's criminal activity in the region. This also comes as Iran's foreign ministry denied the accusations by U.S. officials and maintains the position that the attack came from what they call Yemeni victims. Joining me now from Tehran is Professor Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran. Now, Professor, first I want to talk about what we're hearing from Saudi Arabia. This country is kind of echoing the claims of the United States that Iranian weapons were used to attack the Aramco oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. How likely is it that these claims are true?
I don't think anyone in Iran believes it because the United States has a strong military presence in the Persian Gulf. They have many naval ships. They have many bases. Western countries have bases. They're well established here. So it's very difficult to imagine that a host of Iranian missiles and drones flew over the Persian Gulf and then struck targets in Saudi Arabia without detection. Or if it came from the north and they flew over Iraq, it's the same thing. The United States, their Air Force flies over this region. They have a huge presence across the board. And Saudi Arabia has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on their military, and it's been focused on Iran. So all of their installations are alongside the Persian Gulf region and directed towards any potential so-called Iranian threat. So how could such a thing be that the Iranians would carry out such a massive strike, yet no one in the American or Saudi military is able to detect it? On the other hand, the Ansarullah, the Yemenis, the Houthis, they've been carrying out more and more drone strikes and missile strikes in Saudi Arabia. That their technology has been evolving over the last 4.5 years. They've been going deeper inside Saudi Arabia. They've been very accurate in striking their targets, many of them oil installations. So it's quite believable that they would do it. But the real issue is not Iran or the United States, it's Saudi Arabia and Yemen. If the Saudis would stop the massacres and the slaughter and the starvation in Yemen, the war would come to an end and there would be no more strikes on Saudi Arabia.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about that, because what I'm hearing you say is that if the Houthis of Yemen did this, they did this, like they claim, as retaliation for Saudi Arabian crimes in the region. On the other hand, what you're saying as evidence that it was in Iran is not that Iran doesn't have the capabilities, but it's that it's impossible Iran could do this without being detected by the U.S. So I want to ask you this. Is it possible that it was Iran and that the United States simply allowed this to happen?
Well, I would put it differently. I would say that if it was Iran, then the U.S. military presence in this region is worthless, and U.S. weapons are worthless, and their radar systems are worthless, and their missile defense systems are all worthless. So the Americans have discredited their military by being completely unable to detect such an attack.
Now, many analysts say that a major hot war, that is, a conventional war against Iran by the U.S., is virtually impossible. Economically, we know the U.S. is already waging a war on Iran. But in terms of a hot war, what is the actual possibility?
I think it's not likely, Michelle, because if the United States even carries out a limited attack on Iran, Iran's retaliation will be very extensive. It will be disproportionate. The Iranians have already stated this to the Americans twice through diplomatic channels. They will hit back very hard. And not only will they hit the Americans hard, but they will hit those countries that have allowed the Americans to have a presence on their soil. Saudi Arabia would not survive a war with Iran, and neither would the United Arab Emirates. They would collapse almost immediately. And right now, the Saudis are incapable of fighting Yemen. They've lost the war. So imagine if they began a conflict with Iran as well. They could not survive both the Yemenis to the southwest and the Iranians on the other side of the Persian Gulf. And you have many Iraqis who have huge grievances against Saudi Arabia for their support for ISIS and Al-Qaeda in all these years, and all the explosions and the murders that were carried out in Iraq by these groups that were funded by Saudi Arabia.
Now
if there is a war, the United States would lose its key client regimes.
Now, you've spoken in the past about how Iran and its allies are ready for war, that they don't invite conflict, but they are fully prepared. When I hear this, to me, this sounds very similar to how United States officials are speaking, are making announcements that they don't want war, but if their enemies are going to force our hand, we will be, prepared to launch the full might of the United States military. What's the difference in these two countries and the way that they're, talking to the international community about the way that they are ready to engage militarily?
Michelle, I survived 2 chemical attacks in the 1980s. Many others didn't. Those chemical weapons were given by the United States and its European partners and allies to Saddam Hussein. The United States has been sanctioning Iran for decades. The United States under Obama carried and initiated these sanctions that we see today, and tried to make Iranians suffer as much as possible. Obama called them crippling sanctions. His intention was to cripple Iranians. Trump carried out what he called brutal sanctions. He wanted to brutalize the Iranian population. The maximum pressure campaign is to make Iranians suffer as much as possible, to prevent them from doing trade, importing food, importing medicine. This is how the United States treats Iranians. This is their intention. Iran has never initiated any conflict with the United States. And even now, the US president has repeatedly said he has spoken about obliterating Iran. So when the United States carries out acts of aggression, tries to harm the Iranian population, tries to kill Iranians, and make such threats, there is no moral equivalence here. The Iranians are simply saying, if you start a war, we will finish it. We will strike back hard. We will destroy all those oil and gas assets and the ships and the tankers in the Persian Gulf if you push for war. So the Iranians are basically saying, back off. That's why the Iranians accepted the nuclear deal. The Iranians wanted to bring about a more favorable atmosphere. The Iranians gave concessions to bring about stability. And then Trump goes and tears the deal. Obama didn't abide by the deal. He also betrayed it, but Trump totally ripped it apart. So who is to blame here, the Iranians or the United States?